and she made me this cool map that I took. I got in trouble at the temple on the mosque on the Temple Mount because I took a picture with this there, and they were like, "What is in your hand? What are you doing?" And so I showed him, and then the guy softened up right away. I said, "My little 7-year-old did this," and he was like, "Oh, okay," and then it was fine. Carter, am I up? Cool. Thank you. All right, cool. Thanks, guys. I'm just going to take you through where we went and some of what we saw and what I thought was cool about it. So that's where we went. The first day, we flew in and then we went to Caesarea on the Sea. So Caesarea on the Sea was a place where there was this whole city built, but it was like the complex for the emperor. So this is where Herod would have been, and he built all of these crazy structures, including his palace, and he actually built it out on the Mediterranean Sea. There's no natural harbor within Israel, and so he and his engineers formed this port by burying cement that's mixed with like volcanic ash that they brought in to do it. That sort of stuff is still standing there. It's pretty interesting. Cool to see. This would have been around in Jesus' day, and this is just one of the places where life would have happened. You remember that they were in the Roman Empire, and so there's a lot of Greek and Roman structures all throughout Israel. It's not like it was just Israel, it was Rome that was over Israel. So they had all of these structures. So Herod was their puppet guy, and so he had all of this built. So just an idea of what that sort of city looked like. And then there's places where chariots raced and all that sort of stuff. I have 1,000 pictures. I tried to pick the ones that were appropriate. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Recently, Israel has really done a lot of work to preserve archaeological sites. So if you get a building permit, for instance, like you would here, you have to get an archaeological permit, and they come and dig pilots first to see if there's anything anywhere, because they built everywhere, and then they'd have a big rain and mud would flow across a town and level it, and no one would build there because it's easier to build on dry ground than mud. And so there are these little towns and things that were uncovered from that sort of stuff. So it's really well preserved, a lot of it. Some of it has been torn down, but there have been people there forever, and a lot of it is really, really well preserved. Now, they've also worked to rebuild some things. And so in some of the pictures, you'll see metal kind of holding together stone and things like that. They're also built on over thousands of years. And so the Turks came after the Romans and built, and then it's just always been kind of that way. So the trip I went on was called the Best of Israel, and the goal was to go and see a lot of different things, a lot of different sites, and get an idea about it. They took us on just a general trip so we could see everything. I plan to take you all, whoever wants to go, back, and we'll cater a trip. We'll decide the places we really want to see or spend more time in the places that we're like, that's cool, but I can see it on Google Earth or pictures or whatever else. So this was cool just because it just had some historical context. Then we went up on Mount Carmel. So this is overlooking Mount Carmel. You remember when Elijah and the prophets of Baal had their little showdown. And this is a high mountain there. They don't have high mountains, but this is high for there, and it overlooks a lot. And it's cool because you can kind of see all around. They don't have like mountain ranges. They do pretty far away, but they have like hills that pop up in different places. And so looking down from there and just imagining what it was like for Elijah, right, to be overlooking Israel, the land that's his, that's theirs, and Ahab and his corrupt wife, Queen Jezebel, and that whole saga. So we went up on Mount Carmel. This is where there's a church built, because wherever anything happened, our more liturgical churches will build something there. So there's a Catholic church everywhere that they think anything happened, which is kind of cool. struggled with that some, but being there, I learned some about, like, some things are preserved because the Catholics are like, we think this is important, and they had the money and wherewithal to build stuff. So I was working on that sort of stuff for myself. But this is Mount Carmel, where that all took place. And then we go down a little bit into the Valley of Megiddo. So you could see that from up above, but there's a little tell or a hill that was cities built on cities, about 30 cities built on top of each other. Every time someone would come and conquer, they'd kind of knock your stuff down and then build their stuff on top of it. And so this is the valley. You can see those hills off in the distance. It was cool. Our guide took us and he showed us these hills and he said, look, this is where David fought that battle and this is where that battle was fought, all on hills, right? We think of fights like in valleys. The British did that. I don't think anyone else did that because it's just a terrible idea to fight in the valleys. And so all of these hills are where all of this is. And the hill Megiddo is along a big trade route. You know, when Saul was going to Damascus, he was going along that trade route. That's the King's Highway, I think is what it was called, and it's a big trade route. And so it's a really strategic position. So when you find this shows up in Revelation, this is the Valley of Megiddo, the only real big flat valley that could be, that's what it's talking about. And so this was interesting because strategically, on all of those hills and everywhere that they built, we had a really cool guide, and he just walked us through all of this stuff. And he said, you know, this is what there is, and you can see why this city was important. And then when it shows up again in Revelation, you can see why this valley, if you imagine everyone in the world gathering together for war, this is the only place that could happen in their world that they saw. And so that picture of how that would take place, this is the natural place, but no battles have ever taken place like down in there. No, they might have spilled into the valley some, but they're generally fought on those hills. And so you could look from that valley, and that valley is all Israel, and you could see how on these extreme parts, Israel's only the size of New Jersey, so it's not very big. And you could see how on these hills, like, they established all their boundaries, right? They made their way in by going through all of those places. Yes. Yes, Javier? You have a question? What's your question? Okay, I'll let you think about it later. Okay, raise your hand again if you are ready. You think he wants another muffin? That is quite possible. And then we went up north to Dan, and that's the far extreme north, and along the Jordan River a little bit, and we came to a place, you remember when Jesus was with his disciples, and he went across to Caesarea, another Caesarea, there's several Caesareas, but he went across to a place where he talked about the gates of hell, and that he would establish his kingdom and the gates of hell wouldn't prevail against it. This is the gates of hell. It is a cave, basically, and then there's along the wall, there's all these different like little cutouts. And basically, this was a god Pan, which is like half goat, half man, that they worshipped there. This place was Greek. I think it was Greek and not Roman. And they considered it a place, not hell like we think of, but place of the dead, like a mythical place where people would come and go, and Pan was over this kind of area. So there's all of these idols there. And interesting to think about Jesus, like when you go there, there's all sorts of people and there's ropes and everything else, but you could kind of envision how Jesus was there teaching his disciples in a foreign place, right? It's not in Israel per se, ancient Israel. It was a Gentile location. And he's looking at this and saying, you're going to preach this gospel, and like all of what they worship won't matter. Like what we have to share is so much more. And Pan, if you want to do some research, was an interesting god, and there's a lot of really terrible things they did in worship of these gods. And just the idea that like Israel is here and Jesus would go into these places because that's the territory, right, that they're going to take. Because God is going to spread light throughout all these places. So it's cool to go and see some of these places. It's just this one rock wall, and then it's green and it's nice away from there. But that is that is that. And then we went down to the Sea of Galilee. Sea of Galilee is a lake, and it's pretty cool. We got to take a boat ride, and we got to talk about Jesus. We had one of our pastors preach this little mini sermon. It's really cool to see. The cool thing about the Sea of Galilee is the Sea of Galilee has like all these towns around it, right? You're from Colorado, so you know that we have towns along rivers, right? We have water. And so there's all these towns, and so my training as a missionary, I was looking around thinking, if I was Jesus, or if I was one of his disciples, and I came and I was like, how are we going to do this? And you look, and there's just all of these towns. And so as you read Scripture, you hear these little towns, and they're all around the sea. And so that picture I just showed you is on the other side of the sea, so you can travel the sea to get to all of these places. We didn't. We traveled by road mostly, but the Sea of Galilee is cool. And one of the things, I have a video that I didn't put on here because I didn't know how well it'd show up, but the Sea of Galilee is in basically a valley, and the Jordan River starts on this hill, on this little kind of mountain range above it. And basically, it creates a funnel. So when the wind blows down the Sea of Galilee, it gets really rough. So we stayed in a hotel right on the sea for a couple nights. And when we got up in the morning, it was really rough because this wind was blowing and it was just rocking. And we were in a big boat when we were there, and it was calm. You can see the water, and you just think about being in a little fishing boat on water that's really rough. I don't know if any of you have been on very rough water, but you could see why the disciples would be afraid and why they knew that at certain times you want to get off the Sea of Galilee, just because of the orientation of it. I'd always read that in Colorado and been like, our lakes don't get real rough, right? For the most part, they're still fairly calm. But this was very different, and just to see how that was, and then how Jesus based in Capernaum, and then he went to these places around it, but he had his home base where he was. Speaking of Jesus' home, this is the synagogue in Capernaum where Jesus would have spent his ministry time and lived. You can see there's a metal pole holding up one of those pillars. This would have been built a little bit after on the same grounds where Jesus was. Jesus' temple was built with different stone. So on the outside of it, you can see some black stone, not the polished white stuff that they would have had the synagogue, but this is essentially the same synagogue. This one would have been built in about 300 AD. So same synagogue, essentially, is where Jesus would have shared, right, in his town. So what we don't read a lot of, but we know, is Jesus would have consistently gone to synagogue, because whenever he goes somewhere else, he goes to synagogue. He participates in where he is. That seems to be fairly normal. He's asked to speak because he's in synagogue. And so this is the synagogue where Jesus would have taught. And this is that town. You can see a little bit. Now, the walls are knocked down and whatnot, but just a little bit of these little spots would be houses. And then there's walkways and things between them. The pictures can't do justice to what you can actually see by being there. But there's all of this, and it reminded me of African villages, kind of the way that everyone lives very close together in a confined type space, small rooms in their houses, not anything like what we live like. And so there's, you can see at the top of that picture, kind of a circle-ish thing. They built a Catholic church over where they think Jesus' house was. How do they know where Jesus' house was? They don't. So they just picked a house, and they're like, we think that's the one. And so but they built a church. This is all owned by the Catholics. They preserved all of this area. They preserved all these structures from hundreds of years ago. And so one of those, I do appreciate what they did, building a church on it and putting a window at the bottom of the church. Weird to me, but cool that all of this was preserved. So that's Jesus' home base. So for 3 years, that's where he based out of, and then he wandered all over. But when you hear he didn't go back to his hometown, this is his town where he hung out. And then we got to go and see one of you remember the word Decapolis when you're reading through Scripture and Jesus went to the Decapolis. There's 10 big Greek cities, basically. And this is one of those big Greek cities. This is a hill overlooking it. And you can see the kind of structures and things that would have been around in his day. On the left, where those pillars are, that's a temple to a goddess. Then there's a theater straight ahead. On the right side is the red district, where they would have had bad things going on and all sorts of stuff. The red light district is what we would call it. That sort of stuff. And this town was big. There were a lot of little housing projects and whatever everywhere. Just to give you an idea, the Israelite towns are typically very small, except for like Jerusalem. But the Greeks had a lot of influence, and there were all these huge cities, and they were very advanced. They'd have mosaic tiles on the floor. They had bathhouses that were heated through fire, like in the floor, right? So they had stands that the floor would sit on that somehow they would waterproof, and they would have heated bathhouses and all this sort of stuff. And just interesting to go from Capernaum, where Jesus was, right? With a synagogue, and this is the biggest, most impressive structure there, with a town that looks like that to a town that looks like that, and all of this stuff, just the contrast and the understanding of those things. That was one of the fun things being in Israel, is seeing these things close to each other and seeing how different they lived, and recognizing that when Jesus was in Israel, there were all these foreign influences. They were everywhere. It was just very normal for these things to be all around there. This is Jericho. Not really much to show you in Jericho. Jericho is a little hill, and not impressive hill. This is on top of the little hill. The cool thing about Jericho is that Jericho's not on a water source, so there is no river or lake anywhere near Jericho. They have a spring, and that's it. But the spring is enough water to water farms. And so when you read that they came into Jericho, that was the city, right, when Joshua and they march into Jericho, they have a wall around this hill, and they have all of the water internally that they need, making Jericho super fortified. You can't cut off spring water from them. And all of these farms run on just this water. So Jericho's this city in the middle of the desert. And there's no reason to have a city there, but there's water. And so that was really cool to see. And it was some of the beginning of seeing how God puts water everywhere throughout Israel in order to give them water, right? Water is life. And so to do that. But I couldn't get you any great pictures of Jericho because there's just really nothing there. From there, we went over to where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, and the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in most of them in that cave. That's not the one where the shepherd boy threw the rock. I don't know if you know the story. Shepherd boy was out tending his sheep and did as boys do, and he was just throwing rocks, and he threw rocks, and it broke something, and he went up and found these Dead Sea Scrolls in this cave. And so they were found in these caves because there was a people group that had rejected, around Jesus' time, had rejected the Israelites and what they were doing, but they were Israelites. And so they came out and they lived on the edge of the desert, and they devoted themselves. They were sort of like monks, and they devoted themselves to writing. That's why we have the Dead Sea Scrolls. They just wrote copies, and then they also wrote commentary on what they thought it meant. These people, there were a few dozen of them. They think John the Baptist might have been one of these people, might have hung out with these people, and then left to go do baptisms in the Jordan because he was similar odd to them, though. Very devoted to Scripture, very anti, the religious establishment of the day. And so we got to see a little bit of their town, and then there were these caves. So when the Romans came in 70 AD to conquer the Jews were just a problem for the Romans over and over again. They came to conquer them. They decided to wipe them all out. So these people were peaceful, but they decided to wipe them out as well. This is Megiddo. We didn't get to go up to Megiddo because we were there the 1 week they were fixing the tram. So we didn't get to go up, but you can see Megiddo. There's a trail that goes up on the right side there. Megiddo is this mountain palace that Herod had built because he was afraid of everything and knew that you couldn't trust Rome. And so he built a palace up there. And this is where you read in the Maccabees inhabited, I think, Megiddo. And then when in 70 AD, this is where the last holdouts were. that the Romans had to come and conquer. Built by Herod, same guy who built the stuff on the water and that sort of stuff. And that's just historical, not really biblical, but historically cool kind of place. It would have been fun to go there, but we didn't get a chance. We did, though. My favorite place is this place. This is En Gedi. This is where David and his men hid for quite a while. And it's interesting traveling with people who haven't traveled much. They asked how they knew there was water there because there's not a natural river or anything else. Again, it's in the desert. And I had to point out to them, this is what the bottom of the trail looks like. Now, how do you know there's water there? Yeah, it's green. And trees can't grow without water. And so it's interesting in Israel because it's like desert, 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 and then there's green. And you know that there's a water source there. So this is the bottom, and we got to hike up this whole trail until we got to this. And this is the waterfall at the top, and then there's little tributaries, little waterfalls throughout, and it's a couple-mile hike up some stairs in different places, and pretty cool, fairly easy hike to get up there. Really cool just to see, and then I wanted to go up further, but our group wasn't going further. So he said, yeah, it just terminates. There's a spring up there. There's a little bit more, but there's a spring. And just cool to see how God brings this spring water out everywhere to provide for them. It's interesting because there's you go up and it's kind of like a plateau, and you go down to the Dead Sea, and you'd think that the water table wouldn't be up there, but it is, because God puts water wherever he wants, right? He creates water tables where he wants, and this water has been flowing since David was there. So it's a lot of water for a long, 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 long time. And this was kind of the most impactful because you just got to go on a hike and think about how God brings springs in the desert. And so think about your own life and think about David's life and kind of what they were going through, and where you've seen or need God to bring water was cool, and that kind of helped define some things in the rest of the trip for me as far as what that'll look like. Then we got to go to Bethlehem, and Bethlehem's a Palestinian territory. Interesting, it's sort of foreign land. It's in Israel, but it's Palestinian, so our guide couldn't come with us. So we went into this church, and it's shared by the Lutherans, Catholics, and Armenians, and they all have competing services and whatnot. Really interesting. They think that this might be the place where Jesus was born. And the place the Messiah is born, these three churches are together, it belongs to three different churches. And so it's kind of cool, they're participating together, but also they're competing all the time with each other. And so they're not participating and so it's just a interesting picture, I think, of the church, of kind of what the world is like and what it was like in Jesus' day, how there was, we're Jews, but like those people out in the wilderness, but we reject you, we're going to go do our own thing, and that whole give and take. And so they built this place, and so you go down underneath where the kind of the regular sanctuary is. You go down into this cave, and they would do their services in and out of the cave, and you just enter it just like that. And then I don't have any pictures for you for what's inside because there's not really anything. There's a hole that you can put your hand in to touch maybe a stone where Joseph might have sat down or something like that. And then it's just a little cave that's been goldified and just changed some, but there's not a lot there. This is the church from the outside. It's just a humble kind of church. Inside there's a whole lot going on, but not too much. I did get you a picture of the next cave. The next cave in Bethlehem is one of the caves where they think that the shepherds might have been staying at night during that time. So Bethlehem's all about the birth story of Jesus. So there's caves everywhere in Israel. So they think that these shepherds probably were hanging out in a cave when all of this happened, and you can see light right outside the cave. And so when that happened, they came out. So we spent some time in Bethlehem looking at all of that, and then we got to Jerusalem. So this is the outside of the wall to the city. So Jerusalem's a big city, but there's an ancient old city inside of the city. And so a lot of the wall's still standing. A lot of that wall is not Jewish. It would be Turks, or later peoples from the east who came and built you think of all of the history and everything that had gone on there. So Jerusalem was really cool. We got to get into Jerusalem. You could go inside that city. You could go up on the Temple Mount. On the Temple Mount, there's a mosque built up there, the Dome of the Rock. That's the mosque for men. There's another mosque for women the other way. That's built there. It's a really contentious situation. But ultimately, Israel is a secular state, not a Jewish state. And so there is no reason to take down that mosque. Our guide did a good job of also, when you're up there, saying, look at what this means to these Muslim people. And this mosque has been there for 1,300 years. Does it make sense to knock it down? To rebuild the whole competing, reminded me of Bethlehem, the whole competing church. I want my church on the spot. That kind of thing was interesting because he just pointed out, you really got to think about whether it's right to knock their structure down to build a Jewish structure when their structure's been there for this long, right? It might have been Jewish first, but before it was Jewish, we know Jerusalem was Jebusite territory, I think, and they would have had some sort of religious structure there. And so that was interesting to be up there and think about it, because I'd always heard of the Temple Mount, and I know the Jews think that they have to rebuild the temple so the Messiah can come back and all of that stuff. I don't know what I think of any of that stuff, but being involved in that helped make some sense out of the real practical, what it looks like today, and help think about what it looked like over the years. This is the one part of the wall that does still exist. It's the Wailing Wall. That would have been around in Jesus' day, except for the little stones at the top, the bigger stone at the bottom, some of its bedrock. That would have all been what the original Jerusalem had looked like. And so the Holy of Holies, the temple would have been off to the left, so there's a little tunnel you can go in, and this is the Jews' one holy place, because it's what it was, and it's close, and they don't have anything else, because if you worship at a temple and there's no temple, you cannot worship the same way. And so they have this built, or this not built. This is just an exposed part of the wall, which I don't know why they never built, when they came in and built over Jerusalem afterwards, lots of different people groups, they built up around all the rest of the wall, but they left this open. Maybe God's providence that there would be a part of, because his people are still his people, right? He still cares for the Jews. They're still stiff-necked, just like we read in Deuteronomy 9 today, but he still cares for them. He's still for them, like he still cares for us and is for us. And so that's exposed. People would walk with their, some people would walk backwards out of there so as to not expose their backside to the Holy of Holies, or where they think the presence of God was last seen. So pretty interesting. I went there several times with a friend, and we just prayed. Got in trouble. He got in trouble for praying out loud, a little too loud once. He was a little into it, and it was great. Everyone else was chanting in Hebrew, and he was just going for it. It was good. But we just pray there. I love going to foreign places. I love going to religious sites and praying Jesus into religious sites. I mean, that's what they're looking for, right? And so I just love to go and do that and take part in that. This is the outside of Jerusalem at night. They light up the city. The walls are pretty cool. They've been built up over quite a bit of time. We got to spend a lot of time in Jerusalem, and me and everyone I could get went in and out of the city every night just to see what's there. It's pretty safe. You read some things about Israel, and everywhere can be unsafe if you want it to be and look for bad places. But Israel is a really safe there. We walked through the town at night. We walked through the Muslim quarter, or the Arab quarter, and the Jewish quarter, and the Christian quarter, and never ran into anything that was not perfectly safe. And if you don't like a lot of people, it could be overwhelming, but perfectly safe. And then we went into another Catholic church inside of the walls of the city, and we went to this cave where they think Jesus might have been buried. Interesting, there's two different places. One is the Catholic church, so this is a cave, and then there's a little bitty spot inside of this spot that has enough room for a body or two. So when you read of Joseph, he had a cave, and he had enough room in a cave for a few people, probably. And so that's where the Catholics built their place. And you could go there, and we spend a little bit of time there. in typical Catholic fashion, this is the rock they think Jesus might have been laid on. And so there's this rock, and you can go and pray at that rock. It's been taken out of the cave. I don't know if they even found it in the cave. But that's kind of what they do. So they have like stations of the cross, different places you can go and see and think about what it was like, right, when Jesus died. And then also in Jerusalem is the pool of Bethesda, where it's like I didn't understand this until I was there, but it's like it's a pool to a foreign goddess, and that goddess is a goddess of healing. So it's likely some sort of hot spring or something like that. When you read that the guy says an angel would come down and swirl the waters, and then the first person in was healed, the Bible doesn't give a conclusion to that. It doesn't say that that was true or not true. It says that's what the guy said. And so this being a temple there made a little bit more sense out of it, that you could see lame people laying around just if by chance they could get in there. Because it's in the city, they're begging. Where they would go to get money to survive, that sort of stuff was close at hand. And so there were just these pools, these cisterns, because they learned to keep water in the city, or else they ran out of water. Me at the Garden of Gethsemane, or so they think. That's proof I was actually there. I didn't just download those pictures off Google with my map. That got me everywhere. It's this cool. There's these olive trees. It's Lutheran or something. There's also a big church there. There's a lot of Lutheran churches there. A big church there, beautiful church. Around, but outside of it, there's this olive tree grove. So you'd have an idea when Jesus goes up on the mountain, you could see Jerusalem across and be in this garden praying as he did. Probably often, but the night before he was crucified. And then we went to the Protestant place where they think Jesus was buried. The Protestants, it said it's a garden tomb, so the Protestants are a little bit better, I guess, about doing that. We see things a little different. So there's this, you can kind of see that tomb in the back, but there's this garden everywhere there. And then there's just a tomb. Now they've built a little bit on it, and they've put a gate so it can close and whatnot. But inside there's just enough for to lay a couple bodies. Bodies decompose fast, so some of the stuff you learn in the practicality of that sort of stuff is bodies decompose pretty fast. They won't lay there forever. They'll leave the body there until it decomposes, and they'll put it in a jar, right, and put it up on the shelf or whatever, the fireplace, and then move on. No, that's what we do. We do weird things like that. But there were lots of area for that sort of stuff. So we got to go and see there, and then we did communion there and had a little devotion, and it's cool just to meditate on. Jesus did communion the night he was betrayed, and so being in a place like where he would have been buried, it was just cool, like to be physically there, to have seen and taken in some of the things that we had seen and consider what all of that meant and looked like. It's cool to sometimes just be in the place similar to what Jesus would have seen and known and be able to consider things from that perspective. I really appreciated that. That was a pretty cool experience. And then this is from on top of the wall. You can walk along the top of the wall, and you can see it stretches out there for quite a ways. And there's town inside, and then outside is, it's on top of a hill. And so it's meant to be protected. And then this is what your streets look like inside. This is a street where people are living, not a busy street. Now, if you've been into a market anywhere in the world, markets are very much the same. If you're there, those sides would just be shops, and their stuff would be out, and there'd be people everywhere. But that's what the ancient city where Jesus would have walked through would have looked like more. It's not just an open square, right? There's walls and pathways through everything. That's the city that Jesus would have been in, and then it opens to squares, and you can imagine him when they're having specific religious festivals and things like that. He would show up at certain specific places to do things like tell them that he's the bread of life and that sort of stuff. But that's what the ancient city looked like, and we had a lot of time to walk around there and see what it looks like now as people try to worship God. The Christian quarter isn't very Christian, and they're Armenian. They're just not Muslim, and they're not Jews. Interesting how they define all of that stuff. The Jewish quarter is very different. You can see the way the different people groups live. Jewish quarter is very clean, pretty open, pretty homey. They don't have a lot of, everything else is pretty scrunched down. So that's a general kind of overview of what we got to see. Do you guys have any questions? Yeah. Would the stone still be there? Yeah, you can see there's some modern like plumbing and things. You can see there's manhole covers and things. So yes and no. A lot of it has been knocked down. So when the Romans came in 70 AD, they did their best to at least knock all of the temple down and then knock part of the city down. So a lot of it was rebuilt. The Turks, most of what you see, the Turks built after Rome. Rome didn't seem to have much use for Jerusalem when they got rid of the Jews. And then the Turks were there, I think, until the Crusaders, and the Crusaders didn't do a whole lot. So a lot of the building that you see is not Jesus Day building. It's similar, though, in structure and style. So, yeah. Did I get good coffee? I did get good coffee. Yeah, the Italians have made it there, too. Our guide was he's a Messianic Jew from Russia. And so he was pretty balanced in his views. He knew Scripture well. He's a Christian. And so he understood some things. Yeah, I think in the secular society that they were in, they understood some give and take. Because there's Palestinians and Jews living right next to each other. And Palestinians are not necessarily Muslims. A lot of them are, but they're Arab. And so the understanding of living right next to each other, you either kind of get along or you fight. And he was much more of the get along. He thinks they can live together because he had lived as a foreigner in Russia. No. Even in the old city, there wasn't much tension. We walked freely among everybody, and they talked to each other. I mean, I had a friend looking for a cigar, and so he asked in the Jewish quarter, and they're like, "Oh, you have to go to the Christian quarter, right?" And then we didn't know where to go. We went to the Muslim quarter, and we asked them, and they didn't care. Nobody was like anti. There are extremists, and you could see them sometimes. Some of the people on the Temple Mount would go without shoes because Moses was told he was on holy ground at the burning bush, and so they don't wear shoes. And you could see, based on how they're dressed, there's some extremists, but not widespread at all. They seem to live in some sort of unity. One of the things that's interesting about Israel is they have really tall and nice buildings. And so we read like there are bombings and things like that. You don't have tall, nice buildings if there are bombings. There are, but they are very much the exception, and they don't seem to take place within Jerusalem, and we were in no place that it felt unsafe or that we could see. I've been in Ukraine, for instance, and you could see that they were at war. It was nothing of that sort at all. So they seemed to live in some sort of symbiotic relationship. They were okay. Yeah. Interesting. I didn't know what to expect from that. But being there, it was, different than what I thought. Yeah. It was cool. It was really fun to be there and see all of it. And yeah, me too. Yeah. I would love to see, what am I hoping to see? I'd love to see people go. I think I'm sort of biased from living in Africa and seeing my parents come to Africa. My dad was scared of the world. My dad came to Africa and saw, and now my dad tells people they need to see some more because it does change some things. I think that seeing and experiencing opens up part of the world for us that we don't otherwise see. Some of the reason that I preach the Old Testament, I think it's really important, but I also just think that we need to understand more of who God is and have experience with that. And so this adds on to that. If you get to see some of what it talked about, then it brings some things to to life a lot more. So I'd like to see people who can go, so that they can talk about it. They can talk about it with their kids. They can have the experience and know what it's like. Beyond that, what do I hope for the church? I hope I'm able to communicate some of what I learned, be a good steward of what I learned by being there to you all. But I think it's worth going at least once. There's some people who go over and over again, but just to see, and I think it brings up some questions and it answers some questions, and and the way it is today, I think helps inform how we pray for Israel and how we pray for that part of the world. And when we hear news, not to be sensationalist with the news, but to be more realistic with what's going on and know how to think about it and how to talk to people about it as well. Because it's the center of the world still, and probably will be my entire lifetime. So, okay, so we were there in the winter, and we were there for a magical week. January is like half the people of like November or peak times. And it's the wet season. We had no rain and like 70 degrees. It was maybe 50 in the morning, so I had a very, very light windbreaker that was my jacket for the trip. And it was fantastic. I would go back in the winter. Fewer people, less lines. I don't take my kids to Disneyland because it's expensive and long lines. And so what he was telling us is all of this stuff is super, super long lines, and it's unbearable heat. It's like 110, 120 degrees in June. Lots of people go in June, but it was ideal when we were there. And worst case scenario, in the winter, it can rain, but it's not cold. Not like us. It could be cold rain. It could be 60 degrees and rain, but not like what we... Now, it gets cold at night, maybe 40 degrees, but not,
And the crops there. The crops were all growing trees and stuff.
Uh-huh.
What were the crops?
Yeah, so they grow a lot of things. Their primary export is dates. So if you saw any palm trees, those are date trees there specifically. And then olive oil, grow a lot of olive trees. And they're growing bananas and things like that. Along the side of the road, they have like, it looked like netting. Someone said they thought it was plastic to create a sort of greenhouse effect to help things like bananas grow faster. We were there in the growing season, not in the harvest season. So I guess if you go in a couple months, like March, but everyone wants to go in March, then you see more of the flowering and more of that. But those are their primary export is dates. I think their primary export is tourism and then dates, and then. So there's vineyards all around, so they grow a lot of grapes. Not nearly as many as they do olives and dates, though. There are just fields and fields of palm trees, but not in Megiddo, not where that was. They're more toward the desert, a little bit further. So, yeah. Yeah. I think January or February would be a good time to go for us. April is tourist season. So, yeah. So in 2 years, probably around now, or a little earlier would be an ideal time to go. Okay, so I went on a 10-day trip. There's a 12-day trip, so you basically have a week and a half. But there's a 12-day trip that goes into Jordan, so you can see Petra and then other really cool historical things for a couple days in Jordan, and then into Israel. And I think that if you already are spending 10 days and already spending the money to go, I think doing the little bit extra would be worth it. So I would say 2 weeks. A 2-week period would be the amount of time to do it right. There were a few things over there that I would have liked to see, and you can do that in 3 days. So if you're already in 10, might as well do another couple. Yeah. Anything else? Cool. Thanks for looking at my pictures and letting me tell you about it. It was a lot of fun, and I'll get you information pretty soon about what it looks like to go. But if you're interested, please let me know, because I will need to start putting things together. But the company was cool. They try to have Christians take you through because it's important to have a Christian perspective if you can. There's secular folks, and I'll do my best to make sure we have a Christian guide, or else I'll contextualize things for you. But secular folks don't have the passion that Christians do when they're walking you through what they see. And no, they just have some knowledge. And that's good, but our experience was really cool, and our guide added so much to it for that. Cool. Well, Carter, you can shut me down. Thank you all. Have a great afternoon.